electronic medical record in such a way that it triggers the right kind of screening for the right person. These folks also, with the personal history and family history, remember, they're not candidates for stool testing. Colonoscopy is required for those patients. So you want to make sure you're giving the right recommendation to the right set of patients. Unfortunately, the situation we're in right now is that many individuals with a family history of colorectal cancer are not up to date with screening. This is as you can see, for individuals who have first degree relatives who were diagnosed with colorectal cancer, depending on the age at which they were diagnosed, their screening rates may be at the average for the US population, or in many instances, particularly those who had relatives who were diagnosed at much younger ages, that information often gets missed, and those folks are not up to date with screening. They're less likely to be screened than the general US population, even though they're more likely to develop this disease. So you want to make sure that you're doing an accurate and adequate assessment, tracking and monitoring of family history. Now, the flip side of the equation is, when do you stop screening? And who shouldn't be screened? Now, the ACS, we've never set an age-related limit on when to stop screening. Our guidelines don't say you stop screening at 80 or 85 or anything. What we say is, at the point at which an individual is not likely to benefit from screening, that's when you stop screening. But that is going to vary from one patient to the next. In general, most cancer screenings have about a 10-year opportunity window. That is, if you look at screening programs, you help very few people in the first year or 2 or 3. But over about 10 years, that's when you start finding those early cancers and preventing people from dying from cancer, which is really what screening is all about. So if an individual has less than a 10-year life expectancy, then their likelihood of benefiting from any kind of screening, colorectal, breast, prostate, is much, much lower. So our guidance says you need to look at your patient and determine, based on not just age, but their overall health status. So how many other health conditions do they have? Do they have life-limiting conditions like end-stage renal disease? Patients on dialysis usually have about a 5-year lifespan. So if you've got a 70-year-old who's on dialysis and has been on dialysis for 3 or 4 years, then screening for colorectal cancer is certainly something that you want to think hard about. The other question is, could they tolerate the diagnostic and treatment assessment for cancer? Can they benefit if a cancer is found early? Would they actually be able to go through surgery, radiation, chemotherapy? So those sorts of things need to be kept in mind. And there are actually some tools that you can find online that can help you estimate a patient's overall life expectancy. Or you can do something very simple and look at the Charleston Comorbidity Index, which is looked at particularly in preoperative care, and look at how many different health issues they have, which is correlated to their lifespan. Now, the Preventive Services Task Force, back with their 2008 guidelines, actually sort of created a headache with regard to this issue, and that's because what they say is they recommend CRC screening for beginning at age 50 and continuing until age 75 years. And then they also say routine screening between 76 and 85 is not recommended. Unfortunately, what happens is this word routine, that gets missed. So people just read this as, oh, you don't screen after 75. That's not what they say. And their guidelines, when you actually read the document, make it very clear. People between 76 and 85, some of those folks are going to benefit from screening, and therefore you should be individualizing the decision making. So in reality, they're saying something very similar to the ACS guidelines, but it's been widely misinterpreted. And the misinterpretation is reflected in the measurements that we use around screening. Because if you look at UDS, what does UDS measure? Screening between 50 and 75. What does GIPRA measure? Screening between 50 and 75. So once people turn 76, you no longer get counted in that group. But frankly, when you're 76, you're at higher risk of developing colorectal cancer than you were at 50 or 55. So we don't want 80-year-olds dying of colorectal cancer who should have been screened but didn't because they're not being measured. But unfortunately, that's what's happening. This is a study from the VA. The VA measurement is also based on Preventive Services Task Force and the misinterpretation, actually, of what the task force says, and looks at individuals between 50 and 75. So if you look at 75-year-olds within the VA system who had low comorbidity indices, so they had no comorbidity, zero. These are essentially healthy, well 76-year-olds. They had higher screening rates than those who had a lot of comorbidities. That makes some sense. Still screening a lot of folks at 75 who had a lot of comorbidities and may not benefit from it. But then look at what happens at age 76. Suddenly everybody's equal. No matter how sick or how well you weren't getting screened. Your likelihood of being screened dropped by half simply because you turned a year older. You didn't suddenly, here with no comorbidities, become that much closer to death. But as far as these measurements are concerned, and as far as screening is concerned, they've now kind of cut you loose. So you want to avoid doing that within your practice. You want to make sure that you are screening people based on their likelihood of benefiting from screening and not just stopping because they're no longer part of your numerator. So, barriers to screening. I mentioned earlier that about 3/4 of people who are not screened actually have insurance. So we know insurance is a significant barrier, but there are a lot of other barriers that we don't understand. So we actually, over the last 2 years, have done a lot of work looking at those individuals who are 50 plus and have never been screened for colorectal cancer and finding out why. What are the challenges? What's kept you from getting screened? And we found a number of very interesting things. We, number one, found affordability was the number one issue. People just said, oh, I can't afford that test. Now that told us a couple of things. One, the focus among patients who are not screened is all about colonoscopy. As a matter of fact, most of them believe that colonoscopy is the only test available. They also believe colonoscopy is expensive and therefore I can't afford it. So the colonoscopy focus came through loud and clear. But what also came through was some of these patients had insurance. They did not know anything about the Affordable Care Act and the requirement that no copay or no deductible colonoscopy be available to them in many cases. They could have gotten a colonoscopy for free if that's what they chose. They just didn't know. They didn't know what they had. So making sure that your patients are aware, if they are insured, if they have Medicare, that, well, yes, colonoscopy can be very expensive, but for you, because of your insurance, not so much. Another thing we found is the lack of symptoms. Patients don't know what screening is. Screening is testing in people who have no signs or symptoms of disease. Now, most clinicians know that. Patients don't know that. Patients think that the only reason to get a test is because I have symptoms. Patients don't know that if they start having bleeding from their rectum, if they're having weight loss, if they're having major changes in their bowel habits, that often means that they've got more advanced disease. So we don't want to wait for symptoms to occur. We want to do screening. We want to do this testing in the absence of symptoms, but helping them understand that, because that's a foreign concept to many patients. No family history. A lot of people know that a family history of colon cancer means you're at higher risk. What they don't know is basically 8 out of 10 people diagnosed in the US have no family history, have no other risk factor other than being over the age of 50. So the absence of family history does not mean there is an absence of risk, but they need to know and understand that. Perceptions about the unpleasantness of the test. Again, this comes back to the colonoscopy focus. I love this quote. I don't think it's a good idea to stick something where the sun don't shine. I know I had a number of patients who, when I talked with them about needing a colonoscopy, oh no, doc, I'm sorry, that is one way. Ain't nothing going up in there, we're not having that. And also, the yellow Gatorade, I can't stomach. Now, again, people have never had a colonoscopy, but somebody that they know either told them about the procedure they didn't like, or in many instances told them about that prep and how much fun it was not. So they know about that. But again, they don't know that there are options other than, okay, if you don't want a colonoscopy, we've got something else for you. The fear that it's going to be uncomfortable, again, that colonoscopy focus, and doctor didn't recommend it. Among black patients, this was the number one reason that people gave for not being screened. And among Hispanics, it was the number 3 reason. Now, does that mean that nobody ever told them that they needed to be screened for colorectal cancer? Maybe not, but No one ever told them in a way that made it personal for them. What they probably heard was, oh, you're 50, it's time for a colonoscopy, we'll set up. They don't know what that means. They know they don't want that test. So they haven't heard a message that told them, you personally, Mrs. Jones, you need to have colorectal screening because you're at risk, blah, 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 blah. And then finally, a lot of these folks, 50 and older, they've got a lot of other health issues, and this is just kind of one more thing. They don't appreciate the advantages. They especially have no idea that colorectal cancer screening prevents cancer. They don't know that. You know that, but they don't know that. They don't know that finding cancer early means you have a 90% chance of surviving that cancer versus waiting until you've got metastatic disease, in which case your likelihood of dying is now 90%. They don't know that. So after we got this information and a lot more information, we crafted a number of messages to see, well, if you heard this sort of message, would this change your approach, your thoughts about being screened for colorectal cancer? We tested, I believe it was 17 or 18 different messages with the same unscreened group. And 3 messages rose right to the top. The first being, there are several options available, including simple take-home options. You heard earlier that someone on the panel talked about the fact that this test can be done at home. A stool test at home is very attractive and appealing, and it was attractive and appealing to many of these unscreened folks. Oh, wow. I can do something in the privacy of my house. Because I can tell you that many people, when they envision colonoscopy, what they see is they're going to be rolled into a room, butt naked, thrown down over a table, somebody goes, shampoo. That's their picture of colonoscopy. So, number one, you want to dispel that myth and help them understand your privacy will be respected. And oh, by the way, it'll be done under conscious sedation. You're not going to hurt. Matter of fact, you may not even remember it. So just letting them know that can be helpful. But again, letting them know there are options. So if you can't get over that colonoscopy concern, fine. We've got other good tests and things you can do at home. The second message is, it's the second leading cause of cancer death. The perception among these folks, nobody in their family had ever had it. In most instances, they didn't even know anyone who had it. They thought it was a rare disease. It's the second most common. What? It's the second most common cancer? Wow, I didn't know that. And it can be prevented. It can be prevented. What? No, you can't prevent cancer. Yes, you can. But your patients don't know that. And then third, preventing it or finding it early doesn't have to be expensive. There are simple, affordable options. So again, addressing the expense concern that they have, and at the same time, letting them know there are options other than colonoscopy. So these messages we've now crafted into a variety of different tools. We've got posters and social media messages and heavenly press releases and web band. We got all kinds of stuff. And we've compiled all of this into a message guide. You can download this communication guide from the ACS or the NCCRT website, and all these different tools and messages and template posters, all sorts of things that use these tested messages and you can put right into practice, in your practices. We then went back to the drawing board last year because although we interviewed Hispanics as part of our initial work, all of our initial work was done with English-speaking Hispanics. So we went back and talked to a group of Hispanics from various parts of the country and from various countries of origin to try to ascertain whether there were differences. And actually the barriers were very, very similar for this group. Some of the nuances of the messages are a little different, and there's a much greater focus on doing it for your family, getting screened for your family so you'll be around and those sorts of things. But a lot of the messaging is actually similar too. But we've created this guide, and it has a